Hello and welcome to On the Record. I'm Shereen Bhan. Joining me today in our newsroom is a very special guest, the CEO of Deloitte in India, and Venkatram. Mr. Venkatram, always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining us here on CNBC-TV18. You know, we met at the start of the year in Davos, January of 2022, and it was very clear that while there were clouds looming on the horizon, the Russia-Ukraine war was one of them, commodity inflation was another worry that global CEOs were talking about. Things have only gotten worse since then. But India continues to be relatively resilient even through this storm. As you speak with CEOs, both domestically as well as global CEOs, and of course your own colleagues across the world, what's the sense that you get about corporate mood?
Well, certainly. Thank you, firstly, Shereen, for having me here, and happy Diwali to you. And
happy Diwali to you as well.
I think that India is still buoyant. I think the mood is still good. A lot of good things happening, a lot of events to come. For example, we have the G20 summit on the horizon as well. As far as the general mood goes, I think services is doing extremely well. And despite the fact that, yes, there is the R word, you know, whether you look in Europe, whether you look at America, people are talking about recession. As far as India is concerned, we shouldn't talk ourselves into it. I think there's still a lot of growth left in India, and for many more years to come, and we should just continue to remain positive, and that's the way most of industry is. The area which I do see struggling a little is manufacturing, and I think within that I would probably hazard a guess to say that if you go down a bit into the MSME sector, it's hard for them as well. But it's not all bad news. I mean, if you look at exports, you do have exports in pharma, you do have exports in engineering. So, well, it's a mixed bag, but all around good.
You know, let's just pick up on some of the aspects that you spoke of there, and let's talk about the manufacturing story. And what is very visible at this point in time is that at the lower end, there is an issue with demand, whether we talk about two-wheelers or, you know, we talk about entry-level passenger cars as well. That is where there seems to be pain. But on the other hand, in the luxury car market, whether it is cars or real estate, sales continue to look very, very strong. So are you seeing a significant divergence in terms of confidence and in terms of spending power and spending capacity as well? And what will that mean going forward?
Well, what you say is true, that on the luxury side, we are not seeing things abate. But the reality is that no one is insulated yet from the shocks that hit the rest of the world. We were a very connected economy, and today, you know, we are talking about geopolitics and, you know, how it affects us. A lot of us are obsessed with what happens on the supply side in terms of supply chains and everything else. But certainly, I would say that prices and inflation are something that have been persisting for us even through the pandemic.
Yeah.
And this is really what I think is slowing down demand. And that's something where if you really talk to the mid-sized sector, they are really contemplating saying we've got to do our price increases. But the big catch is if I do my price increase, does it, you know, just increase my inventory pile up because I can't sell? And that's really the issue that people are facing today. That yes, the stock is piling up, but a price increase is required to reset. But if you do a core price increase, and, you know, hopefully optimists like me think that inflation is only till the end of this year and that things will abate after that, then a permanent price increase could actually be damaging to business as well.
Yes, well, we'll have to see how rates pan out. At this point in time, central banks across the world are clear that rates will only have to move higher, including back home with the RBI also moving in tandem with what's happening with the global rates. But, you know, I want to understand what fund flows could possibly look like. It's been a strong report card on the FDI front for India. And, you know, at this point in time, with the kind of conflict that we are seeing in many parts of the world, as well as the specific peculiarities of China and the way that it's chosen to engage with the world and the way that the world is choosing to engage with it, it could mean that we could be beneficiaries. That has been the thesis, that has been the argument that's been put on the table. What is that likely to mean in terms of continued FDI flows?
Well, we did a study, Shereen, about a year and a half ago, and it was recently validated by an independent study done by someone else, that when India is to get to the 5 trillion, you would require about 8 trillion of capital formation, but more importantly, you would require at least $400 to $450 billion of FDI. And that didn't seem very impossible, because at the time when we did it, it was about 80 billion. And as you rightly say, when you look at the tracking of FDI today, it is still very strong. China plus one is something where I think we tripped a bit the first time around. I don't rule it out, but that there will still be a lot that will get done in India. But I look at opportunities from some of the other things that are happening, like say currency. At the beginning of the year, we weren't really expecting such a shock on the currency side, the forex side. But if I look at India's strengths and say, how do we play to those strengths? I think currency is a strength to us on the services side. So the 1 trillion that comes from services will become easier because, we've got a stronger dollar. But if I look at the India side, the manufacturing in India, for the large, strong domestic base that we have, and to say that we should first build for India before we look in terms of building for the world, and use this period of recession in other countries to strengthen ourselves, we should look at import substitution. I think the best time for us to look in terms of saying how do we manufacture even components and other products in India is now. Reason? You've got large companies wanting to come in and invest. They're coming not to export. We sometimes make the fundamental error that they want to come to India to export to the world.
No, they want to come essentially
they want to come
service
for
the
our domestic market, right?
Yeah.
That is our strength.
Yeah.
So invite them in, build for the domestic market, encourage indigenization. This is true even for aerospace and defense and all the other areas as well. And if you can indigenize, if I can use that complex word, what you are really doing is import substitution. And you're bringing down the cost and you're de-risking yourself from the impact of fluctuations in the rupee.
This import substitution or indigenization, as you called it, we've seen this play out across different sectors. Defense, of course, is one where you have now, the second or the third list that the government has actually put out, and it's been the case over the last several budgets where this process of import substitution by way of hiking customs duties, etc., has also been in play. But there's also the downside to it, that people caution that if you go too much on the other side and you're actually going to be choking the import side of the story altogether, we may have to also suffer the consequences of too much of this. What do you believe we need to be mindful of as we move down this road?
Again, to get on my core theme that play to your strengths, one of our strengths has been design and research. Even today, we were just doing another study where we saw that I think it was about 700 multinationals actually have their research and development centers in India, the R&D and design center, the engineering design centers in India. If so much of their design and research is getting down out of India, why is it we as Indian companies can't do much more on the R&D and innovation side from India? So I'm just looking at it from that perspective. I'm not looking in terms of protection or in terms of, putting trade barriers at the borders. All I'm saying is if we find innovative, jugaad ways of doing things cheaper, why not? And that's really the premise of what I'm saying, that I'm not saying put up a barrier to protect industry. All I'm saying is you have a lot of intelligent people here who can do a lot of things. Do it. The second reason is we all know that we're all getting more insular. As countries, we want more protection. We want to have more self-reliance in our own way. It's not just India that needs self-reliance. India is in a more peculiar situation because of its neighbors and its neighborhood, and therefore we've got to be extra careful. So if you look at, say, semiconductors, I think it makes absolute sense to say that we've got to get there. Will we get there in 2 years or 4 years? Absolutely not. It's going to take a period of time. Are we going to start manufacturing that sophisticated machinery that is required for semiconductors? Definitely not. But we should make a start. And we've done it, to just remind you of an industry where we did it so well. It was the automotive industry years ago. And today, a lot of our automotive component manufacturers manufacture for the whole world. So I'm saying first do it for India. Fundamental premise being you're good at R&D, you're good at design. The next piece which you need is quality. Do it to international quality. I think this is where we sometimes trip up, that we always do believe that the quality for the domestic market can be different from the quality for an international market. It's a bit like cashew export, right? When I was young, we used to get the broken cashews and the big cashews you ate when you went overseas. I don't think we can do that anymore.
Let's talk about a space that was very, very hot through the course of the pandemic, the startup ecosystem. We saw valuations rocket. We saw unicorns being minted every other day. And while it's very clear directionally we are headed in the right direction, at this point in time, there is going to be some pain on account of liquidity drying up. What is your own take on what we're seeing happen in the startup space, the funding that is likely to come in, where it's going to go, what valuations are going to look like? What do you make of that story?
Well, I think startups are certainly a very, very important part of the future of this country. And it's across a range of what we do. And what excites me the most is you also have startups in areas like climate sustainability, where I think, frankly, if we marry the rest of industry, academia, and the startups together, we have a story that nobody else has, right? And we are not doing it as a small country. We are doing it as an extremely large country, and a country which has the history of being able to replicate good performance. If we do it, we'll do it well, and we saw it in digital payments, for example, and we saw the outcomes of it, like, say, financial inclusion. So I think there's still a big story there. You hinted a bit at governance also, for example.
Yes.
I do certainly think that, yes, in startups, governance is challenging. You also do have conflicts in terms of ownership and management and everything else. But it'll sort out over time. It's already starting to sort out in a big way. It's on the table. People are talking about it. And the good thing in this country is when we talk about it, we generally fix it. We may not fix it publicly, but we do fix it. So I think that will get fixed. Capital starvation, yes, I think for a period of time now, particularly in periods of material uncertainty like this, and the pressures that of what is happening in the United States, I do think, yes, capital is going to be a little more scarce. Valuations in any case, I think, were a little on the high side, and perhaps getting a little sobriety into it is good for all of us. So I think overall, I don't think it's gloom and doom out there. I think it just means you need a little more hard work. There's no easy money anymore.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think it helps others as well, because sometimes when you get overfunded and you start indiscriminately using the money, you also harm the ecosystem, because there's some other genuine players out there who get swamped out because there's one player who's able to flood the market at a lower cost, etc.
Yes. You talked about governance, and I want to address the issue of not just governance-related risks, but other risks that CEOs are mindful of today. Cybersecurity is a big challenge. With this whole move towards work from home, etc., there has been not just cyber threats, but other kinds of issues that companies have had to deal with, moonlighting being one of them, which now industry after industry is trying to understand what they should do, how they should deal with this. If this is the new reality, how do you ensure that you move forward? Do you shut the door on it completely? Do you leave a window open? What are some of these other risks and challenges that have emerged through the pandemic that CEOs and companies are having to deal with?
Well, as you describe moonlighting is working at night. I think a lot of people have been sunbathing. They've been doing it in the daytime as well. They've been working at more than one company. I think it's an ethical piece of it. It's a confidentiality, data privacy, and everything else that kicks in. But it's also a new reality. We cannot expect that the workforce of the future is going to be, it's going to be more about jobs, it's going to be less about employment. And it's something we've got to deal with. Similarly, when you look at hybrid working, it's here to stay. I mean, we keep humoring ourselves by saying we look at it 2 years at a time. But I think some things, you get hardwired, it's become a habit. I mean, I think our brains are now thinking in terms of the fact that if I come to work 3 days a week, it's a good thing to do. So I think we have to get that piece of it sort of institutionalized. That will happen. Sorry, I missed the other piece of what you said.
No, I'm saying that the key risks, whether it's cyber
so if
or...
Yeah. Now, so therefore, one side of it is that it's basically working from home and the nature of how you deliver that work. We stress more in terms of how you work, the workforce. We are talking less about the workplace. I genuinely think that one of the greatest advantages we've had during the pandemic is automating a lot of processes, looking at processes new and saying, okay, this is the way we used to do it when we had 5 people doing it, but can I do it differently? The second thing is disaggregating it and saying, can I do some of this which is repetitive centrally? Do I really need to do this coming to an office, or is it something that I can do remotely, not even sitting in a tier 1 city, but sitting in tier 2 or tier 3? So all that stuff is also happening at a very good pace. Second piece you talked about was cyber. Cyber, I think, is the risk. One, because digitization is pervasive. It's very deeply embedded in our financial services. If you look at the use of technology, it's there in our tax systems, it's there in our emails, in our correspondence, and everything else. The bigger worry there is, today, the nuclear button is really a cyber button. So when you look at cyber security, it's not just the non-state actors that we've got to look at, we've got to look at the state actors. And we do have a lot of valuable national institutions here. And one can expect that at some point in time when things overflow from a Ukraine crisis or elsewhere, that the cyber button will be pressed. So we should always be cautious in terms of cyber security. It's going to be there to stay with us and haunt us. This again is a bigger challenge for mid-sized business, because for them to articulate what they need to do and invest in what has to be done is harder. And we've got to find platforms on which they can engage on, which they can also be supported.
Let's talk about the business here in India for Deloitte, and it's been growing substantially. What's the plan like as we close out 2022 in terms of hiring, in terms of growth?
Well, happy to say that if I look at the overall footprint of Deloitte in India, as of this week, we've crossed 100,000 people in India. That's true to what my global CEO Puneet was always expressing, that he had committed 125,000 people in India. We're nearing that goal. I don't see a slowdown or let up in getting to that goal, and we will be there very soon. Within the Indian practice itself, in terms of all the organizations in India, I think that growth has been consistently good. And if I look at the next 4 years, it's extremely positive. We are looking more in terms of getting out of only the major cities into the towns as well, because we discovered during the pandemic that 60% of our workforce actually was outside of the big cities. And so now we are going more and more into the other states as well. The other exciting thing that's happening in India is, I think the states are getting energized. And we're generally finding the competitive spirit in states is also increasing. So we do see that eventually the India of the future will also have a lot of industry, manufacturing, etc., not just concentrated, but dispersed across. And I think that's the way to go. So we are planning for that India as well.
Well, one of the other aspects that I know the Big Four, including Deloitte, have been working on is, of course, the ESG framework, which was put together with the World Economic Forum. What's the India experience been like in terms of measuring the impact of what companies are hoping to do on the ESG front?
The trouble in India is when we start something new, we talk a lot about it, but the deliverables are always a little opaque. My personal view is that sustainability is ingrained in every piece of advice that we give our clients, every piece of it. Because if you look at an attest piece, there is an attestation that needs to be done. If there's a financial reporting piece, again, India is trying to be ahead of it in terms of what we have to do. When you look in terms of manufacturing, if you look at supply chains, it's there, it's everywhere. So we are trying to say, how do you make it ubiquitous and say that your mindset when you think is think sustainable. Now, can you sell it as a separate product or service? I think initially you've got to package it in a way by which you can make people understand the importance of it all. But eventually it has to just get weaved into the overall fabric of what you do. In terms of size of what will the opportunity, it's huge. But the cost of not doing it is 3 times as big. So I think the loss to the economy if we don't build a sustainable environment is very much more. And that is really what we are looking at. I mentioned the G20 earlier. I think that's a huge opportunity for India to, I mean, as you know, we have taken our climate pledges and we are advancing what we are doing. And I think that that's an important thing that we've got to put out ahead to say that this is something that we have to build on. We can also look at food security and say, what are we doing around food? We can look at energy security. See, all these things are interlinked. It's not just sustainability. It's sustainability and survival that we have to look at together.
You know, let me end then by asking you about some of the big global changes that are on the anvil. The OECD very recently put out just the broad framework of what they hope the world will move to in terms of regulating crypto assets. You know, there is, of course, the BEPS norms that have already been articulated as well, but we have to see how those play out. In terms of global changes, what are you going to be watching out for and the implications of them?
Well, BEPS is important, and it's important to our clients as well. I think that the most important thing that I'm looking at is the transformation that cloud is going to bring to us. Because I really think that people underestimated the power of putting things on the cloud. And that transformation, the cloud and digitization are really going to transform the world in which we live. And therefore, when I then look ahead and when people talk about, the other things, the meta and everything else, to say what's going to happen, I've sort of started believing that all of this is really going to happen. So I think being able to look beyond the curve, imagine what the future could be like, and then say, how can you participate as part of that future, also requires a mindset that when you invest, you should also be willing to abandon what you do to adopt something new. I think the worst thing that any company can do today is to get so committed down a path that they can't make the change which necessarily is going to happen. So there is going to be change as a constant. It's going to be a huge amount of change. A lot of it is going to be technology-led. It's going to lead to vulnerabilities like cyber and everything else that we talked about. There's going to be an insularity. Countries are going to be looking more in terms of protecting themselves. We've got to look at those supply chains. So it's going to be a very anxious world. And, that's the point of time in which, doctors come in handy.
And women too, and that's what I want to end by talking to you about. And I know that the global CEO Puneet Ranjan has been committed to championing the cause of bringing more women into the workforce, and of course that's been his mandate for Deloitte as well. I want to talk to you about the experience here in India.
Well, we have a fantastic experience. I mean, we have about 46% women in the workforce. Perhaps, we started this only about 7 or 8 years ago, so in leadership positions, we are down to about 17-18% with a target of getting to 25. And I'm being honest about it because it's an area in which I thought I would be able to accelerate faster but could not. But the more important thing is, if you look at women in the workforce, I think that again should be on the India agenda, which I think it is. And therefore, when you look at certain parts of business, when you look at manufacturing, when you look at offshoring, we just look and say, which parts of this can actually be done by, say, a woman-only workforce as well. So I think getting more women into the workforce is important. Unfortunately, the pandemic has been a bit of a setback. I mean, I want to end on a high, but the reality is that the pandemic was a setback and you had women leaving the workforce. We are working on it. We are testing it out to say, how can we advise companies to get them back in a different format? Hybrid is certainly one of those areas in which you do it. But I certainly do think the big driver for the growth of India to 5 trillion, I won't put a number on it. I have it somewhere in my head, but I can't remember it offhand. But you will not reach the 5 trillion.
No, if you don't have the women
40-45% of your women in the workforce.
Absolutely. Well, and we hope that we move at least somewhat closer to that target. I mean, it's going to take a long time, but at least we shouldn't be going in the other direction, which is seeing a decline in the number of women actively participating in the workforce.
7 years. I give it 7 years. In 7 years, we will be there.
In 7 years, we will be there. Well, we hope that that is not just an aspirational target, but a target that we do achieve, and more power to everyone who's going to stay committed to that cause. Always a pleasure. Thanks very much for joining us here, and again, I wish you a very, very happy Diwali.
Thank you, Shereen.
Well, that's it then on this edition of On the Record from all of us here on the show. Many thanks for watching. We'll see you shortly. Stay tuned.